All right. Thank you so much for joining us this evening to talk about Raincoast Safeguarding Coastal Carnivores campaign and the Kitlope. My name's Alex, and I'm on the communications team at Raincoast. And last May, I had the privilege of traveling to the Kitlope. So some quick housekeeping notes before we start. Feel free as we go along to type in any questions in the Q&A box. I think it's down below for everyone. And we'll leave lots of time at the end to go through those questions. We'll also be recording this event in case you want to watch it again or share it with some friends. So a bit about the Safeguarding Coastal Carnivores campaign. The goal is to permanently end commercial trophy hunting of all large carnivores in the Great Bear Rainforest. And we do this by purchasing hunting rights and effectively ending trophy hunting in those regions. And we'll go through how that all works during the event. So far, we've acquired commercial trophy hunting rights in approximately 33,000 square kilometers of BC's Great Bear Rainforest in Canada. And for some context, local context, that's an area larger than the size of Vancouver Island, or an area larger than all the Hawaiian Islands combined. So it's a very large area that we have protected from commercial trophy hunting. So to kick off tonight, I'm going to play a quick video to give you all an introduction to the Kitlope, which is the next hunting tenure we're raising funds to purchase. And it'll give you a really good sense of the place and show some voices who help protect the Kitlope from other extractive industries. And then we can launch right into the discussion. So I will get that going right now. Okay.
Rainforest in the world.
Okay, here we go.
The Kitlope is the largest untouched temperate rainforest in the world. For millennia, it has been the home of the Henaxiala people, now part of the Haisla Nation. They welcomed people from all over the world to join them in their efforts to protect their homeland. Because of these efforts, in 1994, the Kitlope was protected from logging and extractive industries. However, the protection for wildlife is incomplete.
My people, the Henaxiala, never touch grizzlies. We were taught that's our friend in the wilderness. We never were taught not to touch them.
While the Haisla Nation banned the killing of grizzly bears in Kitlope over 25 years ago, and in 2017, the BC government extended the ban throughout the entire province, commercial trophy hunting for all other species still occurs here.
Shag, we call grizzly. Shag, grizzly bear.
To end commercial trophy hunting here, Raincoast is purchasing their 5th hunting tenure. This includes the commercial hunting rights in an area of over 5,000 square kilometers that encompasses the entire Kitlope Nuyumjees Conservancy.
All right. So that should give you a bit of an introduction to the Kitlope. And now I'd like to introduce Brian Falconer, who's Raincoast's Guide Outfitter Coordinator. So Brian, if you want to introduce yourself and tell us your connection to the Kitlope.
Thanks, Alex, and welcome everyone. I know many of my friends are from over the years who have followed this campaign over the years are tuned in tonight. So I'm delighted to be with you all, at least virtually. We had originally planned, we were scheduled to be in Kitlope right now as we speak. sadly, COVID has changed some of our plans there. Just wanted to introduce, for those of you who aren't familiar with the program, in 2005, we started the objective to purchase the commercial hunting rights in British Columbia. Successive governments had done nothing to stop the incredible slaughter of large carnivores in these places by mostly foreign trophy hunters. We came up with a rather unique solution that if we can't have this practice banned, then potentially we could buy them out. And so that's what we started to do. And in 2005, we raised $1.3 million to buy our first commercial hunting territory. British Columbia is unique in jurisdictions in that it gives exclusive rights to a single guide to guide foreign hunters and requires foreign hunters to go with that guide. So these are really monopoly businesses that were set up starting in the 1920s, but really mostly through the 1940s and 50s. So as wildlife became rare throughout the world, these territories became worth a lot of money. And so it's been an expensive process, but it's been an incredibly rewarding process. We look at these huge areas of landscape now where we control the commercial hunting rights. We are required under the Wildlife Act to do hunts every year. So I've been involved with Achiever, our research vessel, and a number of people over the years conducting these hunts. I'm happy to say that we still have maintained a 0% success rate. And we have a very staunch return clientele who, despite our lack of success with killing, rather enjoys seeing the wildlife. So that's kind of how the process began. We've added a couple of tenures since then. We just completed just over a year ago the purchase of just a spectacular territory in the very heart of the Great Bear Rainforest, and it spans much of the Kitasoo territory. The Kitlope itself, my own involvement with Kitlope goes back to the early 1990s, where the Haisla invited myself and Maple Leaf, the vessel that I owned at the time, to come into Kitlope to join them in the fight to protect the Kitlope Valley. They were resisting a plan to log the entire watershed. It had been identified as the largest intact coastal temperate rainforest left in the world. So we joined with the Haisla in the early 90s, and through a brilliant campaign led by their elders, this area was preserved as one of the most beautiful protected areas in British Columbia, and a huge gift to humanity. It is indescribably beautiful, as you saw from some of Alex's beautiful video and some of the photos that you'll see tonight. It's a very difficult place to describe. These towering mountains just plummet right into these deep, deep, deep coastal fjords. When we're anchored in Kitlope Anchorage, we're anchored just straight south of Smithers in the interior of British Columbia. This fjord cuts so far into British Columbia. It's one of the reasons that we see a lot of species in Kitlope that we don't normally see on the coast, is because it is this wild, beautiful highway that connects the interior of British Columbia and the coast. And so we see a lot of interior species there that we don't see anywhere else on the coast. So what I'd like to do tonight is give you a little bit of an update. Some of you have been tracking this campaign for some time. I'd just like to talk a little bit about how we're making out. We have had considerable fundraising success to this point. COVID has potentially put a little damper on that, but we're still getting lots of support. So just like to give you a little bit of an update in a few minutes.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Well, Brian, can we dive into Cecil Paul and your relationship with Cecil and kind of his wishes for the Kitlope?
Cecil is, I'm proud to say, my brother, my Henaxiala brother. He's one of the hereditary chiefs. He's the chief of the Killer Whale clan of the Henaxiala people. His best friend, Johnny Wilson, Sonached, was the chief of the Eagle clan. They were my guides when I first went into Kitlope. They were the ones who really showed me deeply and intimately how powerful and how special this place was, and how connected to that they had been for millennia. They had hunted and trapped in that area for all of their lives. So it was an enormous privilege traveling with the two of them, and their stories moved me deeply, and they moved the rest of the world deeply. Kitlope was kind of unique in that the campaign was successful without the acrimony, without the blockades, without a lot of the things that are hallmarks of environmental activism in British Columbia. It was just one of those things that was such a dead natural that made sense, and it was articulated so beautifully by the elders and by the community that it just didn't make sense to log it. And so it was protected. And as I say, one of the most valuable and beautiful protected areas in all of British Columbia. It's referred to as the Kitlope Nuyumjees Conservancy.
Mhm.
Wahid, Cecil Paul, my brother, when we were in the Kitlope, many stories occurred when we were around the fire at night. And he told a story of a totem pole that had been taken without permission from Miscusa, the village site where he was born at the mouth of the Kitlope River. He said that there were three things in his life that he wanted to see while he was still alive. One was that the area would be protected from logging. The second would be that totem pole, which he, after a couple of decades of searching, found in a museum in Sweden, that totem pole would be returned to Miscusa. And the third was that trophy hunting, particularly for bears, would be ended in the Kitlope in his lifetime. That third wish came from an incident with the then guide outfitter in the Kitlope. The Haisla had established a beautiful camp for a program called Rediscovery, getting a lot of their youth up into the Kitlope and this beautiful, stunning beach on the one side of Kitlope Lake. It was a beautiful camping area and just an incredible place for this Rediscovery program. And breathing life into the youth, the Haisla youth in this community. Late in the summer, the fellow who owned the guide outfitting territory, and I should mention that it's not the fellow that owns it now that we're buying it from, came in, and the elders in charge of the camp implored him and said, "Look, we've got all these Haisla kids around here. Please don't come and hunt in here while we have the kids here." And he arrogantly told them that if one of those Haisla kids got between him and a grizzly bear, he'd shoot right through the kid. So it was something that infuriated them, but it also really motivated them. And that's where Cecil's third wish came from, is that these people could be eliminated from their territory. So that's what I'm really proud to be a part of this campaign, is kind of closing that circle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's amazing.
One of the really interesting things that has happened very recently, I traveled up to Kitimat in February for a ceremony honoring Cecil and his contribution to essentially to reconciliation across this country. And at this very powerful feast in the community, I met a young man named Dustin Gaucher, and Dustin is working with the cultural department of the Haisla. And they have a small rediscovery program now, and they would like to get it back into the Kitlope. And so one of the things that I would be very happy to do is to make sure that that kind of a confrontation could never happen again. Mm-hmm. And that place would be free of that kind of activity, so that the youth, the Haisla youth in generations to come, could be comfortable and safe there.
Yeah, That's amazing. And I see that Dustin is in this webinar. So hello, Dustin, and it's great work that you're doing.
Yeah.
So Brian, can you tell us how much further we have to go and how people can get involved?
Sure. We have a purchase agreement to buy this huge hunting territory. It's the second biggest one that we've purchased. We have a requirement to raise $650,000, and we have to raise that by the end of this year. So it's a serious objective. To put that in perspective, a fellow said, "Oh, that's not bad. That's half the price of a house on the east side of Vancouver." So that is a bit of an interesting perspective, because what we're looking at doing here is protecting wildlife over an amazing, huge area. But we are at this point over $305,000 that we've raised. So we're about halfway there, and we're hoping that the momentum will pick up as we get towards our deadline. That historically has what happened with all of the territories that we bought. This is an idea that people can see really easily. It doesn't take a great deal. It's not a very sophisticated thing. Literally, we are buying the lives of this wildlife. And so it's not a campaign that may or may not succeed. It's simply buying the right to not kill these animals. And so a lot of people have really supported that, and supported it at, from a small level. I remember, I always have difficulty telling the story, but, when we first started, we did the first campaign. One teacher brought her class into the office in Sydney, and they put $39 on the table that the kids had raised for this, and said, "Here, use this to save the bears." So, it's been everything from that to some very, very significant contributions that people have made as their legacy on the planet. So it's obviously $39 at a time. It's a hard go, but people have had that same sort of reaction to the campaign. So.
Yeah, and online we also have some beautiful prints for sale. I thought I'd share some images while we're here, taken by some of our photographer partners. These are all taken in the Great Bear Rainforest. So these prints are, I think they're $99 each, and they're available for purchase on the website, and the money goes straight to the Safeguarding Coastal Carnivores campaign. And at the end here, I tacked on some images from the Kitlope I took. There's the maple leaf right there.
All right.
Brian originally traveled on, and that still continues to take people in there. Not this year, but every other year.
Kitlope Lake, that was the last slide. Cecil often described as the cathedral of his people. And it's like that. It's just this magnificent alpine lake surrounded by these towering snow-capped mountains. It's just so beautiful.
There's some grizzlies. And there's Cecil signing his book that came out last year, which is called Stories from the Magic Canoe.
Yeah, if you haven't read it, it's a beautiful book. It's some of the stories of his life told in his own words, and it's just a gorgeous book.
So I think that we should jump into some questions, unless you have anything else to share, Brian.
I'm happy to take questions. That'll probably bring up lots of good conversation.
Yeah. Let's see. All right. So feel free to type in any questions that you have. While we're waiting for people to ask questions, Brian, do you have any favorite stories from in the Kitlope that you can share?
Um, yeah, one of the really interesting things that we saw one morning, we used to go up the river, and there were two cabins partway up the river, and one was built by a fellow from Camano, and the other was built by the Haisla Band Council. And we used to use one as a cookhouse, and we'd put up some tents, and we stay up the river for um, at least a week at a time. We woke up one morning, and we're sitting around the fire and waiting for breakfast, and right across the river from us, there was a pack of wolves that came down, and they sat and watched us and laid down in the grass. But what was really fascinating to me was the wolves were all white, and this was early springtime. So what that would indicate is that these were interior wolves. These were the larger interior group of wolves, that not our smaller coastal wolves. So it was absolutely fascinating to watch them for a good hour as they just sort of milled around and relaxed, and pups playing, and it was really beautiful.
That's amazing. So that brings us to one of the questions. So which species will be protected, and for how long will they be protected?
These licenses are granted on a 25-year basis. They've never not been renewed, which is why they have such value. They're considered like the forest licenses, to be in perpetuity. So the protection is permanent. It's one of the things that inspired us to do this, was that when we got the grizzly bear ban, which Raincoast led the campaign to end the grizzly hunt in British Columbia, when that was successful, it was successful with one government. That was the second time we'd been successful in doing that. We had done that in 2001. And when there was a change of government, they reversed that decision immediately upon taking power. So what we recognized was that kind of political protection um, was subject to the vagaries of electoral whim. And so what we set out to do was to purchase these because they survive governments. And so even if governments wanted to rescind the moratorium on or the ban on killing grizzly bears, we would have the option of not killing them. And so it is permanent protection. There are 61 species that we are allowed to kill. 60 of them are not grizzly bears. So in Kitlope, we've seen beautiful wolves, lots of them. We've seen lots and lots of black bears. We've shared our camps with black bears lots of times, lots of grizzly bears. We've seen wolverine. I've seen cougar. So there's basically virtually every species of carnivore that we have on the coast is in Kitlope. And the other thing that we have there as well, which is kind of a bonus, is that it is probably the biggest concentration, the greatest concentration of mountain goats in all of British Columbia. Mm-hmm. And there's quite a bit of concern right now about mountain goats, that their populations have been declining through most of their range in British Columbia. So we have some of the best goat hunting or non-hunting territory in British Columbia. The other thing that we have in the valley is that come down from the interior is moose. There's quite a very valuable and viable population of moose in the river estuary. So quite a lot of different species.
Mm-hmm. And so Matthew is wondering how much trophy hunting currently happens in the Kitlope.
Well, I think it's possible that Angus, the fellow we're buying the territory from, has joined us tonight. He's flying up in the north, and under the purchase agreement, we got a period of time to raise the money, and he has agreed not to, in the meantime, hunt carnivores. And so right now, the only thing there's a couple of ungulate hunts, and we approved each of the hunts up until we take possession of the territory. So right now, there was quite a bit of hunting in the area. And one of the things that we're always careful about as well, and we learned this from one of the other territories, is that the current level of hunting is predicated by the energy of that particular guide outfitter. So if a guide outfitter wants more quota of almost any species, the ministry relies on the guide outfitter's word to say that there's lots of that species available. And so they typically grant every increase in quota that they need. So what we concern ourselves with so much is not so much the level of hunting at the current rate, because there are territories we bought which were not being hunted heavily, and some which we bought were completely overhunted. So what we look at is the capacity and what could happen here. One of the territories we were looking at, there was a potential for a group of Russian oligarchs who had got together and were going to buy out a territory. And you know that that would not have gone well for that territory, that the hunting would have increased really dramatically. So the current level of hunting isn't the indicator that we use. What we're looking at is essentially the habitat. And this is some of the most delicious and productive habitat in all of British Columbia.
Mm-hmm. So some people are asking to clarify, are we trying to outbid the owner of the guide outfitting territory, or is he relinquishing that? And can you clarify the 25-year number that you said?
Sure. What I'd like to say about Angus, this particular guide outfitter, is that he approached us. He bought this territory as a result of wanting to spend more time with his family. He loves being outdoors. His journey was very similar to mine when I used to have a sports fishing resort, is that he found he didn't have much in common with the people that he was guiding. And he, as Clayton Mack, who was a famous New Hulk grizzly bear guide, said, he found he liked the bears better than the people he was guiding. So his journey is one of moving into wilderness tourism and photography trips. He's very sincere in this, and so his objective is to get the money that he put out to purchase the territory, and he wants to move into guiding wildlife photography. We're really, really supportive of that, and we have. I did a presentation to all of the guide outfitters in British Columbia through the Guide Outfitters Association, and we offered that same thing to all of the guide outfitters in British Columbia, that if you want to transition from killing wildlife to viewing wildlife, we will put all of our resources at your disposal.
Mm-hmm. And Brian, what's the long-term plans once we acquire these rights?
The plan is to deed these to the First Nations. We have a memorandum of understanding with coastal First Nations. They are expensive and time-consuming to maintain in good standing. So we are maintaining them at this point. When we've accumulated them all, they will be gifted to First Nations, and under an agreement where they completely end the trophy hunting within their territories. So the long-term plan is not for us to own these and to keep non-hunting them forever. The plan is to turn them over to First Nations, and First Nations will rescind those rights completely.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Jackie's wondering, how have we raised money in the past? Was it just word of mouth, or any partner organizations?
Most of it has come from private donors. We have had, particularly in the initial picking up of momentum, we have had some foundation funding, but that's been far the minority of it. Mostly it's been people who understand this as a brilliant opportunity to make a real difference in their life. And so it's been mostly private donations. We have had a number of different events where we've raised money. Some of the images that you saw, the originals, were sold at a photographic exhibition at the Karen Cooper Gallery on Granville Island, and that helped to raise a lot of money. People have done individual fundraising efforts. People have done runs and various things to raise money for us. There's a Facebook peer-to-peer fundraising campaign that you can take part in, where you can raise funds among your Facebook friends. We've actually had prizes of an opportunity to be on Achiever up in Great Bear Rainforest as a prize for the peer-to-peer fundraising. So there's a lot of different ways, and by all means, if you have any ideas, we're really, really open to new ideas for fundraising.
Mm-hmm. And someone was asking if the donations are tax deductible, and they are.
Yes.
And
also, if you're in the United States, there's a number of people who've signed up from the US. We have a 501c charity in the United States as well. So if you're a US citizen, your donation is tax deductible as well.
Yeah. So someone's wondering if the rivers in the Kitlope are important to salmon, and particularly Chinook, but really any other species.
All species of salmon spawn in the Kitlope. It's one of those arteries of Mother Earth, is what Cecil calls it. And from the steelhead right through to the Chinook, all the species of salmon go up the river to spawn. They have both types of sockeye salmon. They have river run sockeye that spawn in the river, and then they have lake spawn sockeye as well. And it's one of the things, COVID willing, we've rescheduled our trips there into mid-August, and we hope to be there right at the height of the sockeye time. But it was the breadbasket of the Henaxiala people, and they still, every year, Cecil and his sons would come out and fish the mouth of the river, both for sockeye, coho later in the fall. Yeah, the whole spectrum of salmon. It is an absolutely critical salmon river in that area.
Mm-hmm. Gary Stein is wondering, will there be any trips on the Achiever organized for next year or 2022 to the Kitlope?
Distinctly probable. Even when we're finished raising the money for this, and I'm optimistic that we will meet our goal, we have worked really extensively with First Nations on the coast and their youth programs, and it's one of the things that we want to commit more Achiever time to. And sadly, we had that set up in the Kitasuhehe community of Klemtu this year, as well as we worked in the Quay River with the camp, the youth camp of the Heldsick people. So, and we really look forward to working with the Haisla and Henaksiala people, getting them up into Kitlope. And around that, we will very likely have what we refer to as donor engagement trips, where we'll get people into the Kitlope. And even if when we reach our objective, there will be other projects that need funding in Kitlope as well, and we'll be there for them.
That's great. Someone was asking is there any trophy hunting on Princess Royal Island?
Not anymore. We own well, other than a couple of times our hunts have taken place on Princess Royal Island. We own the commercial hunting rights for all of Princess Royal Island. It was the second territory that we purchased. So all of the spirit, essentially that took care of almost all of the spirit bear territory. And this territory that we've just finished purchasing takes care of virtually every little piece of spirit bear territory in British Columbia. I don't think some people were aware that you're not allowed to shoot the white-coated spirit bears, which are a color phase of a black bear. You can, however, in the same area, shoot the black bears that contain that gene, that carry that gene. And so one of the things that we were really adamant that we wanted to do was to secure the hunting rights for all of the spirit bear territory, to do what we could to protect the spirit bears.
Mm-hmm. Great. Someone's wondering if you know where the name Kitlope comes from.
I know where the name Haisla comes from,
Mm.
which is actually what the Henaxiala refer to as Kitlope. And I'm sorry, it's a gap in my knowledge of where Kitlope actually comes from. But the Haisla comes from the Henaxiala word, which means the source of the milky green waters. It's a completely glacial fed river. So through the spring and summer, the water turns that beautiful creamy green. And that's what it refers to.
Cool. Yeah, it's definitely creamy green since
Yeah.
being going there.
Gorgeous.
Oh, I see Dustin here. He says Kitlope means rock. And it was said that we were the people of the rock. And it's so it's a Simshan word for rocks. It says briny. Thank you, Dustin and Briny.
All right.
That's great.
I love this. This is great, having all this resources online as well as an audience. It's perfect.
Yeah. Brian, how does this place compare to any other places that you've been?
Almost no way to compare it. That like
Mhm.
I once was addressing a plenary session of the LRMP. It was the Land and Resource Management Plan process, which was dividing up all of the landscape. When I finished the presentation, one of the chiefs from Wikinu said, you know, why aren't you part of this process? And I said, well, I don't believe in this process because this is a Sophie's choice for me. These are like my children. These watersheds all have a different personality. This one is different. Muscle Inlet is different from Coots, is different from Kitlope. And what this process is designed to do is saying, which of your children will you sacrifice to save which other children?
Mm.
So I can only describe it as unique. The smells, particularly the cottonwoods of the river, the close proximity of the glaciers, the air when you're going up the river and down the river, you go through these patches of air that is warm and succulent and has the smell of cottonwoods, that sweet smell of cottonwoods and spruce. And then you come into the icy cold downdrafts that are coming off the mountains. And it's just this really spectacular landscape that changes around every corner of the river. The river is a mighty river and you sense the power of it. But I think the most striking thing about it is how close the granite faces of the mountains are. That was very recently deglaciated. So all of these mountains are just these huge, steep granite buttresses. It's kind of like the pictures you see of Yosemite, but times 1,000. So it's the scenery is really difficult to comprehend, to describe, and it's very nurturing. It just kind of, it feels like you're closed in, and it's a wild place, but it also feels very comfortable.
Mm-hmm. So Christine was wondering if you could share more about the totem pole, and whether it was returned and whether it was put back up.
The totem pole was actually, even once it was found, and it was a beautiful story of Cecil in his desperation having a coffee in one of the local cafes in Kitimat and meeting a young woman who helped him in his search and eventually found the totem pole in a museum in Sweden. Several delegations went to Sweden, including Louisa, Cecil's sister, and the government was not easily persuaded to let go of this totem pole. And the Haisla delegation said that they would have their best carver do a replica pole for the museum. And eventually that was the case. That was, the pole was swapped for a replica pole, and it came back to Kitimat where it's at for a period of time. And then eventually it made its journey back into Miscusa, where it sits today.
Amazing.
And it was a story of perseverance, and just not accepting no. And that's my experience with the Haisla people is that is exactly, they've got the time and they're not going to accept no. And if it takes longer, it takes longer, but this will happen. And it did happen, and it happened in a very, very beautiful way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we have someone wondering with regards to the report that recently came out about old growth trees in BC and how there's just a lot of underreporting on old growth forest, and wondering if the Kitlope contains any old growth forests.
Contains almost exclusively old growth forest. It was identified. A big part of the campaign in the 1990s was an organization called EcoTrust, and they contracted a really good friend of mine to look at watersheds using satellite technology. And Keith Moore was a brilliant forester, and he looked at all of these watersheds on the coast. And what they were looking for was, they were concerned about the islandization of conservation, that these areas that were being protected were too small, and looking for something. So the Kitlope was identified as the largest untouched, unlogged coastal temperate rainforest in the world. And coincidentally, that was also when the flags for the logging road went up on the trees. And that's when the Cecil and the Henaxiala and the Haisla got involved in fighting to protect it. There were a couple of very, very small hand logging operations right at the mouth of the river, really, really tiny. But everything else is just this massive, beautiful coastal old growth. So it's an enormous gift to the world.
Mm-hmm.
The concerns about old growth in British Columbia are very real. Even under the Great Bear Rainforest Agreement, in some areas, particularly the southern part of the Great Bear, there's a lot of atrocities being committed in the name of EBM logging and the identification of old growth. It's not going well. So I think that there's a resurgence in the energy of people who are really concerned about the fact that we have so little old growth left. Vancouver Island is a classic example of that, as are the adjacent areas of the Great Bear Rainforest. In the southern part of the Great Bear Rainforest, there's an awful lot of logging of old growth, and we don't have enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So would buying these trophy hunting rights, would it complete the conservation efforts in the Kitlope Conservancy?
Yeah, the forests were protected under the NUMG's conservancy, and so it will never be logged. And so the wildlife protection was not there. It was one of the, and we consider this an industrial activity. This is people coming in, killing this beautiful wildlife, hacking off the heads and leaving with the trophy parts. But it is a business. And that is in itself an industrial activity, and it's an extractive industry. It doesn't leave things as they are. And so for us, that protection was, the forests were protected, but the wildlife wasn't. So this is where we have stepped in to up that level of protection to include the wildlife.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So there's some people wondering, how can they see the Kitlope?
It is one of the most difficult places in all of the coast of British Columbia and Alaska to access. It's at the end of the longest fjord in the world, and the estuary itself is very shallow. The river is very broad as it goes through the estuary, so it's very tidal access. There are literally no communications up there. So it is probably the most remote place on the entire coast. There were potentially going to be a couple of operations out of Kitimat, taking people in. But as of yet, there are no Henaxiala and Haisla operations. Angus Morrison, who is the guide outfitter that we're buying this territory from, is already setting up to do photography trips in there. So if people are interested in going in, I can put you in touch with Angus, and I would say he's probably at this point, short of Raincoast, or Maple Leaf is also doing trips in there. Maple Leaf Adventures, my former company. Maple Leaf has always had a deep respect in Kitimat and in Kitlope, and they've continued to do trips into Kitlope over the years. They have fairly limited number of trips and limited number of people on board, but absolutely brilliant, fabulous way to see it as well.
Mm-hmm. And stay tuned, because there's talks of a contest to win a trip into the Kitlope through Raincoast. So
Yes.
stay tuned for that. Let's see here. We're kind of bouncing around a bit, but I think it's great to kind of have all these questions coming in.
Right.
So Nancy is wondering if the ban on the border between the US and other countries has reduced the number of hunters, or is it mostly Canadians who are doing this hunting?
I haven't talked to a lot of guide outfitters since COVID, but I would guess yes, definitely. Raincoast was instrumental in banning the importation of grizzly bear parts into the EU. That ban continues in place. It was our scientists that did the presentations to the EU Parliament and initiated the ban. And that ban has been reviewed and upheld a number of times. So that changed the clientele. That used to be a fairly major source of clients for guide outfitters in British Columbia, particularly for grizzly bears. But, you know, mountain goats and sheep and moose, all of that, and black bears and cougars and wolverine, those are all still available to European hunters. But that ban certainly shifted things to the guide outfitters. Marketing was largely in the US. So I would guess that this has had quite an impact on them. And Angus, if you're on, if you could, you know, clarify that with a message to Alex. But I'm pretty certain that the percentage of clients that were American were very, very high.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Someone's wondering if you have any idea how many bears are in this territory, and if there's any way to know this.
There is ways to know it, and Raincoast has been better at that than our provincial government by a long stretch. There are no ways to know it accurately, particularly in this type of terrain. There's just no way to census bears. We have done a lot of work with DNA using what are called hair snags or hair traps. And so they're a non-reward bait system, and we've done that in many of the territories. We haven't worked in the Kitlope, but it takes a number of years of concerted effort to come up with population estimates, the kind of work that the provincial government didn't do. So we have potential estimates of bear populations in some of the other areas of the coast, but we haven't in Kitlope. I can tell you that there's a lot of them, and it's probably, you know, from my personal experience, it's probably one of the best, some of the best grizzly bear and black bear habitat in the world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so we just heard from Angus, and he said the breakdown of trophy hunting clients is roughly 60% American, and the rest is divided between Canadians, Europeans, Australia, and New Zealand. However, on grizzly hunts, the portion of Americans jumps to about 80%.
Right.
Mm. Thank you for sharing that, Angus. All right. And Angus also says, oh, Susan says, sorry from the US.
I think I know that, Susan. It's okay, Susan. We don't hold it against you.
And Angus also says, thank you so much for this opportunity. And he's really happy to partner with Raincoast, and it feels like a dream come true.
Fantastic.
So I think to slowly start to wrap this up, Brian, can you give us one more rundown on how people can get involved and how we can help?
Yes. Ensure your place in heaven. Send us some money. I think directly donating to this is simply the most direct and perfect way that you can support it. If you have any fundraising ideas, we're really, really happy to do that. We have had some of the most spectacular photographers in North America get together and form as a group, donated some beautiful, beautiful originals to us. And that was really helpful. The peer-to-peer fundraising on Facebook is really good. If you have any projects that you can do and raise money in the name of this campaign, we're really keen to help get the word out for all of that. But talk it up amongst your friends. That's one of the things that, every little bit helps, for sure.
Totally. And we'll send out a follow-up email in a couple of days with a link to this event if you want to share it with friends, and just some more information on the campaign and how you can help. And maybe to wrap up, Brian, can you talk about why it's important that we buy this now?
Well, I think there's two things that come from this, and Angus has been quite an inspiration to me because it's a really similar journey to what I was on when I had a very consumptive sports fishing operation in Rivers Inlet. That this is the path to the new economy, and in these times of COVID, I think a lot of people have understood that we need a different path. That going back to the old normal is probably what got us here in the first place. It certainly was a major contributor. And I think that a lot of the insecurity that people are feeling now, hopefully will lead them to a different path. And this is part of the new economy. There's no question that this is a way that both the Haisla and Henaxiala youth, if they are inspired to do this same kind of thing, to take people, Dustin's talking about reopening the grease trails that they used to trade Ulican grease into the interior, and operating trips, wilderness trips along the old grease trails. A lot of this provides a phenomenal economic opportunity. So aside from the incredible conservation value that this is, and the actual compassionate act of saving lives by not killing, it is a fantastic economic opportunity. It's an opportunity to move in a different direction economically. And so I think it's important from both of those things. It's important from an ethical point of view, that the idea, because you have a bunch of money and some technology, that you can sneak up on these spectacularly beautiful animals while they're grazing in their own living room and blow them away and cut their head off and take that home. That's an anachronism, and that's something that itself needs to be opposed. But I think that the opportunity that it presents economically and ethically, it's pretty hard to argue.
Well, that is great. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. We really appreciate it. And you'll hear from us soon with an email.
Yes, and I'm very sorry that I can't see all of your faces, but it's been fun chatting. It's kind of a little weird. It feels a little bit weird to be talking to people that I can't see, but I am really delighted that you all came out, and thank you so much. And we'll see you soon, I hope.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Bye for now.